So see me wear it.
I take you don't like it today.
Hi, everybody. We're gonna get started to respect everybody's time. We're probably gonna get some late comers as we usually do. The sign-in sheet at the front. There were some agendas up front and also some copies of the minutes. Everyone doing good? Awesome. We've got Cloudburst on the line with us. Can y'all hear us okay? Perfect. So we're gonna start the live stream. So as you know, just keep that in mind. We're live streaming and recording. So today we're really excited. We're gonna get a chance to dive a little bit more into some of the proposed strategies and tools that Cloudburst has kind of pulled together with us. We've already reviewed them as on the ACC Gov side to make sure they're generally aligned with what we have seen in the community, with the data we've collected, et cetera. So today's goal is really just to go through them, workshop them a little bit, get your feedback. These are not final at all. They're meant to build upon all the great work you're already doing. They're not meant to replace, just enhance. Keep that in mind. But before then, just a couple quick updates. Our home ARP allocation plan was accepted by HUD, so we are in the clear to move forward with that as we want. The next steps for that is we're really just waiting for the strategic plan to be finalized so that we can create a really robust RFP that leverages both the ARPA funds and the home ARP. But we're excited we got approved pretty quickly. And then also congratulations to Family Promise for yesterday's approval. Mayor and Commission approved their proposal. So y'all are going to be working with the ARC collectively to run this eviction prevention program through the end of 2026. So we're really excited about it. Madison, I don't know if you want to share with the team like your super brief synopsis.
Yeah, so $800,000 to $900,000 with the majority of it going to eviction prevention in different ways. Part of it going towards the traditional eviction prevention, focusing on those who are already in the court system, but also a percentage of that funding going to free evictions being filed, which we're excited about to be able to support families and individuals through that. So the ARC will be partnering with us as a subcontractor. They'll be doing, most of the individual work, and then we'll be focusing on family work. But there'll be more to come, and we'll make sure that all service providers are very up to date on how the processes will work to get that funding out. The funding will go from June to June, so it's a lot of money in a year, but I have no doubt that we will easily spend it.
Yeah, and we'll work, obviously y'all have gone through contracting with us before. But yeah, the funding itself, we can use it until the end of 2026. So we have a little bit more time if needed. So yes, so don't forget having to spend it all in a year. But yeah, congratulations and thank you also for your proposal. It was the sole one that we received. And then we'll just quickly, there were a few copies of the November 22 and the April 23 meeting minutes. So I also had sent them via email. If y'all don't have any questions or further changes on these, I'd love to get them with motions and so on.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. So we'll get those up on the website for future availability. So now we're just going to roll right into this discussion with Cloudburst. They're going to lead us through it. Cameron over here is going to be taking notes. And yeah, again, keep in mind, these are not final. These are not meant to replace anything, just really enhance all the great work y'all are doing. All right. So Cloudburst will let you take it away.
Thanks, Alejandra.
We can't hear you. Okay, Ryan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Alejandra. So I know everyone on the committee probably knows who we are, but we'll do introductions for people who may be joining on the live stream. My name is Scott Pruitt. I'm a data and evaluation specialist with the Cloudburst Group, and I am joined by two of my colleagues. I'll let them introduce themselves. I'll pass it to Stephanie.
Everyone, Stephanie Jennings. I'm a senior technical assistance advisor
with the Cloudburst group, and I have to apologize that I'll have to leave about 30 minutes before the end of the meeting. Go ahead, Heather.
Hi, I am Heather Dukeshire, and I am a Systems and Programs Analyst with Cloudburst.
Thank you. So for today, we will just give a brief update of what we've been working on the last month since we last spoke. We will review some high impact strategies that we have discussed and prioritized with partners in ACC Gov. Again, these are not final, but for your consideration. And we'd also like to hear from you additional ideas, things that we may have missed, and then talk about next steps. So since the April meeting, we have been really working on completing provider interviews. Thank you so much to all of you who gave your time and were able to speak with us about these strategies and everything else that's going on in the community. We've also continued data review. So since the last meeting, again, people brought up different data points that we might consider with victim services and outreach and data from the Athens Police Department. And we have received that through ACC Gov and have reviewed it. Thank you for that as well. And again, we've also discussed these high impact strategies. So building on the previous meeting where we looked at needs and gaps. And today we are presenting kind of the highlights. So what has risen to the top in those conversations we've had with ACC Gov that would be high impact and feasible to some degree in Athens. So just to give you an overview of what we will be talking about today, not necessarily in this order, but we will be talking about strategies that cover a spectrum of needs in the community. So some of these strategies really encompass strengthening the entire continuum of services and coordination, work with partners, but then also looking specifically at some of the areas that we talked about in the last meeting, including unsheltered homelessness, shelter and transitional housing, and permanent housing.
Can it be full screen? Is that okay? Does anybody mind?
No.
Oh, thank you. I still can't read it.
It's kind of blurry.
Oh, sorry.
It's just like-
Do
I
I
think
need to do something on my end, Alejandra?
No, I think it's our end.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you.
Great. All right. So as we dive into these strategies, again, we have tried to focus on things that either one, build on work that is already happening in the community, or two, if it's not happening, are things that you've expressed very strong interest in wanting to happen. And we would like your feedback. We'd like your feedback in general, but kind of two things we've been talking a lot with about ACC Gov in terms of feedback we've gotten from them that we would love yours as well, is thinking about what the impact would be. So is this something you see as high impact, low impact? And then what would be the difficulty of making this happen in the community? So how feasible is this? Is this something that would be a relatively quick win? Or is this something that, because of different, policy and funding and logistics and all kinds of things, would be really, really, really difficult to make it happen? We would also like to hear from you about what would need to be addressed in order to make this these strategies more feasible, if it's something that we want to pursue. So number Yes.
Did they want feedback like right now on these things?
I think as we go through each strategy, we can jump in and provide feedback. The way they're gonna be presenting is like kind of strategy by strategy. So jump in as you need. Again, as Scott mentioned, kind of really focusing on that potential impact, but feasibility, like how hard is it gonna be for us to really get it done in Athens? And also, again, what would it take for us to make it happen? If that is something that you're interested in pursuing. So that's kind of where we're centering the conversation, yeah?
And like Alejandra said, we'll go strategy by strategy. So the first strategy, the first thing is really strengthening the COC. So we see a strong COC as the backbone of any strategy, any strategic plan. And so that is probably likely to include allocating funding in a way that ensures the Homeless Coalition has appropriate staffing, resources, and support to really carry out the activities of the COC. So, coordination and policy and establishing committees and analyzing data, doing evaluations, and ensuring proper, again, coordination and consultation for planning purposes. We know that you all have spoken with the Chattanooga COC and are very interested in how they are operating. We have some examples of what different COCs have done with staff. And so we chose these particular COCs because they bear some resemblances, important resemblances to things that are going on in Athens. So importantly, these are all college towns, and they have government agencies as their collaborative applicant. And they are, I know Athens has talked a lot about the limitation that really it's the only county with resources. You think you use the term resource hub. And all of these COCs really have a similar pattern where, they're the only COC around a ring of counties that don't have any or very, very few resources. And they also have some similar policy constraints that you all are operating in at the state level. So one example is Lexington, Fayette County COC. This is in Kentucky. They have 2 full-time employees dedicated to the continuum of care. They're both government employees. So the government is essentially funding position and benefits for the COC to take advantage of. And these 2 employees have really focused on administrative organization to strengthen the continuum. So extreme weather planning, they've undertaken equity analysis and starting initiatives through committees. They have created and implemented written standards for every program in the COC. And they're really the faces of like intergovernment coordination for things like emergency solutions grants, so ESG funds, your community development block grants, CDBG. They are the people who are in charge of making sure the COC is looped in and being properly coordinated with. And they also help the COC lead advocacy and community support. So doing external community meetings to engage and educate community members on what the continuum is doing. And then they're the intermediaries for advocacy. They also have a city county unified government, but for like letters of support and stuff and like that for different pieces of legislation. Another,
I didn't see who raised their hand first. Okay.
So, it's driven mostly by 2 government employees who keep things going. That's Is that accurate? And that's the model that you guys are looking at?
No, this is just one example of how other communities are running their COCs. So this is just a case example of how they do it in Lexington. We're not necessarily proposing that we do it this way here.
Okay.
It's just an example. Yeah. And yeah, John?
Well, I was gonna say, I don't see how that's very different from, maybe adding a couple things to a couple job descriptions at HCD. I don't see how that's a lot different, or like,
We've had an
this is what, this
This is what we are.
is what
Yeah.
our COC is already doing for the
Right.
most part. And I also have some concerns about how advocacy is inherently limited when working for the government.
I have a lot of concerns about this model, including those, yes.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It is really similar to what we're doing already. So
I think ultimately handing over some autonomy and building that entity to be able to have autonomy should be the goal.
And we agree with you 100%. I mean, HCD is absolutely on board. We're not meant to be the lead in this. We're meant to support the existing or the COC in its activities, be a part of it, but we are certainly not meant to be the lead.
yeah, because even Lily's position, she's not just doing COC stuff, right? She's doing a lot of other things. And so it's not really dedicated. So it's a version of this, a watered down version of this.
Well, I think we've always had an HCD employee who is helping drive the coalition. That wouldn't be new. I think what the question that I'll probably have with all of these is how did they actually get it off the ground and determine who's making those decisions at the coalition level? That's the nitty gritty of it.
And I think a lot of the conversations internally with our coalition has been about, if we're looking at changing format or expanding capacity of a coalition, what additional funding is it bringing to the table across the board? And so I look forward to seeing what other examples of what other COCs we're going to look at here, and hope that we see some of that too.
Yeah, and I think you will. And
Just a quick question is, with this Kentucky example, did they, because I know it's a different state, did they also have a 501c3 associated with the COC?
Or is it
So-
a 501c3?
Or
No, so in all of these cases, there's a government agency that's the collaborative applicant, not a 501c3. So just as Athens has a government agency that is the collaborative applicant, these are all examples of communities that also have a government agency collaborative applicant, and really how they've been able to work together with their COC board, and how the government has been able to dedicate staffing and resources in a way that the collaborative applicant is serving, as the government is really serving to further what the continuum of care is doing as a board.
So they still have a board that is a 501c3. It's just they don't have any staff that are,
They have a COC board that doesn't have a 501c3.
it does not have, no.
So our board serves as a board of a 501c3 as well as the COC board. You don't have to necessarily have a 501c3.
All right,
yeah.
thank you.
Okay. So another example is Eugene, Oregon. I know we've talked about them a couple of times. So again, we've called it Eugene at the COC. It's the whole county. It's Lane County, Oregon, and they have they have a number of employees through housing and community development who might touch the COC in some way, but they have 4 full-time staff dedicated to doing this work. And they have been very, very, very focused on establishing and expanding their coordinated entry. And so, really looking at housing and resources, shelter included, that is being referred to through coordinated entry, establishing these centralized and coordinated navigation centers. And then also, because of the position that they have where their collaborative applicant is a government agency, ways to integrate mainstream benefit applications into their coordinated entry processes. Stephanie, is there anything you would add to that? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Sure. I would also add that they went through a complete redo of their process a number of years ago, really focused on how to make sure that there is leadership from multiple elected bodies along with leadership from nonprofit organizations in order to coordinate across all of these different entities. And I would also add that there was a huge focus on creating more site-based permanent supportive housing. And that has resulted in hundreds of units of additional PSH in the community because there are a lot of limitations in the private market.
And then Heather, I will pass it to you to talk about Fargo Moorhead.
Yeah.
So were their full-time employees independent of the government, or were they also housed?
They're housed within the government.
Okay.
Can I ask the funding for these positions, or is this just an earmark in the government budget every year that's funding these 2 staff, or these 2 and 4 staff positions? Yeah, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Or are these positions funded out of the continuum of care process? And are they HUD funded?
No, so you get continuum of care funds, and I don't know about Eugene, but in Lexington, the government is providing money out of other funding. I don't know the exact source to be able to provide those positions. They don't have enough continuum of care funding, to be honest, to pay for 2 full-time staff and run all their programs.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a blend.
Yeah, okay.
I can add that for Lane County, there's a companion body to the COC called the Human Services Commission that has been in place for many years, which really focuses on how do you align all of the state funds received, the federal funds received, along with the local funds to support a range of activities in a coordinated way. And so that collaboration essentially kind of precedes the formation of COCs and help to create a foundation, a staff foundation. Their public health agency is also within the same area. And so they're also looking at integration around public health.
Go ahead with the next one.
All right. So Fargo Moorhead is actually a little bit different from the rest because of its unique geography, but we're focusing on it just as a way of looking at regional collaboration across COCs. So Fargo is part of the North Dakota COC. Fargo and West Fargo. Moorhead and Dilworth are part of the West Central Minnesota COC. And there is an organization, a 501c3, the FM Coalition to End Homelessness, that leads various response strategies across Cass County in North Dakota and Clay County in Minnesota. So they're working across 2 different states, 2 different counties, 2 different COCs, and 4 different cities. But what they've been able to do there is to develop their CARE system, which is their coordinated entry system. So that coordinates access for prevention, diversion, shelter, supportive housing, and stabilization services, regardless of which side of the river you're on. They also developed a landlord risk mitigation fund, which really focuses on having a way to, mitigate risk for landlords for housing folks who are coming out of homelessness. They also do a data dashboard that's available online, as well as an annual state of homelessness report. So really looking at all that data across both counties, as well as being kind of a hub for education and training for service providers around how to do housing first, how to do harm reduction, all of those things. They also are in the very planning stages of developing a lived experience academy, whereby people with lived experience and expertise of homelessness can participate in this group as leadership, but also as a pathway into working to provide services to other people who are currently experiencing homelessness. Yes,
Do we have an idea of how many employees they have?
they have 3.
Thank you.
And are those government or are those part of the coalition to end homelessness?
Those are part of the coalition. So the the collaborative applicants are part of different entities in each of the states that
There's 2 separate
the area over.
Do we have any metrics on the success rates for these communities implementing these strategies?
Not on me, but yes, we will be looking forward, bringing more information and more case studies into this work. But yes.
This one is just out of the 3 thus far, like the most exciting for me personally. I just feel like the strategies that they're implementing are a little bit more of kind of what folks have talked about in terms of having, you know, a pot of money for landlord risk, or similar to having a pot of money for helping with, you know, those overages when we're using rapid rehousing. Also, the data dashboard, I think, is something that community members are always wondering, you know, what's going on data wise. And so the training as well seems like things that Athens needs.
Yep. And one thing to remember, though, that this coalition does not include any of the collaborative applicant tasks. So those are part of different organizations for each of the 2 COCs that the community covers. So there are other staff that are doing the collaborative application every year, organizing the HIC and the PIT and all of that. So just want to remind people of that as well.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
All right.
Yeah, so generally speaking, Scott, before you move into that one, generally speaking, I think Madison, you shared your opinion. Is that the general consensus? Are we excited about the possibility of potentially allocating funds or staffing for homeless coalition? Thoughts generally?
I mean, I think the kind of what was shared earlier, and I can speak for myself, and I think trying to summarize conversations that the board of our COC is having, is the interest in expanding and building capacity of the coalition would be to be able to be a champion on homelessness in the community, to be advocating at City Hall, to be profoundly in touch with what's happening in the woods at the street level for families living in cars and living in shelters, what's also happening at the high level with executive directors and with other grant writers across the community, and knows how to navigate and bring in additional funds to their community for the various community needs that they're in touch with. Is that kind of, I feel like it's inherently, like a government position is inherently limited from doing some of those things. And that's, I think, where a lot of the first conversations about this started from. I do like the data dashboard, though. I agree. Of all of these, this third one I think is the most interesting, but I don't know that it's exactly what kind of we're most interested in. I think that a lot of the communities we're drawn to, like looking at, are ones that have separate 501c3, whether it is the COC or not, but some kind of umbrella entity that's increasing the total pot of funds for their community for homeless services, and that is advocating, and that is doing a lot of this kind of macro work, and also mobilizing people with lived experience to be integrated and leading the way.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, like the key strategies that we do here in Athens are going to be different than in other communities. But generally speaking, the idea of funding positions under Homeless Coalition to do a lot of this.
And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I also, and this might be an internal discussion, but the idea of a dashboard and an annual report is great. Everybody would love that. But I think we have more urgent things to put our money into before we do something like, I mean, that basically exists to appease the community. It doesn't have to do with direct service work. And I think we need to put our money into direct service work right now.
Go ahead.
I would just respond to that and say, I think that having accurate data is crucial as far as for service provision too. I also think that there's a lot of division and controversy around homelessness and homeless services in our community because there is not compiled data or necessarily clearly communicated data because we are all very busy doing the urgent work that none of us, or I don't see places that community data like that is being shared with the entire community to earn the trust and collaboration of a lot of other members of the community.
I guess I would wonder how it's different from like the Wellbeing Project and all the other data. I mean, we're saturated with data requests for data
One
dissemination.
thing I just want to point out, and I think then we should move on, is that the reason for a data dashboard as part of the FM coalition is because because of the unique geography, right? So in Athens, your COC and your community have a perfect overlap, unlike the Fargo-Moorhead area, which encompasses pieces of 2 different COCs. So there it's necessary because they don't have another way to do that. So again, like the key strategies are going to look different depending on your community. So this is just really focusing in on there are different ways that that communities can look.
And I would just say as homelessness goes, the only data we have on unsheltered homelessness is either people asking me what is the number or the point in time count. And that's a pretty frustrating position to be in, as well as with people kind of having this influx of people coming in from immediately surrounding counties. That's the data that the community is really missing too.
I would just like to add, as far as the data component, what I would hate to see is us trying to reinvent or recreate something that, I feel like, a good percentage of us at least are using the homeless management information system. We have to because we're, receiving these federal funds. What we haven't done a very good job of is getting the aggregate macro data across agencies specific to Clarke County. We've had this conversation in the past. We can't quite figure out how to do it in an effective way that shows those numbers, those real-time numbers. And I feel like maybe if there was someone, dedicated to doing that very piece, I don't think that would be very expensive and very time consuming either. But I think that might be an easy, quick one so we can prioritize a majority of these funds to direct service, but also have that data component so that it's not just overwhelming this. And I'm hoping that data, that's not what that data dashboard thing, in my opinion, would only be a relatively small component of what we're trying to build with the coalition anyway.
I would hope so.
Line item.
It seems to me that we should ask, has anybody asked the Wellbeing Project, just as one example? And that's something, if data points we want specifically can be tacked on.
Yeah, and I just want to, we're kind of,
just a point
Gone
of
away.
information. So there are COCs that have a person who is HMIS completely focused, right? And then it would require us to add in, if we wanted to do something like this, adding in those data, because not everybody does use HMIS. And I think that our HMIS data still needs some work as far as getting it on track with actually being able to, to report it out in a succinct way, but just a point of it.
yes.
And as we bolster, hopefully, the coalition, I think something that they could do is outline all the service care providers, who's providing what, and be a resource to pull those groups together, which helps in data collection. So, that would
I'm
just be
sorry.
kind of an inherent task. And
Yeah.
summarizing this, I think we can all agree that there's bullet points on all of these that we would like to see.
For sure.
Maybe not one complete format.
But the idea
Yeah.
again of, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
So I just want to kind of lift us up from the details here because we have a lot of like more specific strategies on the later slides, but we really gave these examples of things different staffing models are doing. So I just want to kind of think of it like one level higher for your feedback right now. So if we kind of go back here, we have one example, Lexington, Kentucky, of a COC where the continuum of care entity is called Let's End Homelessness. And then there's this government entity, government office of homelessness prevention and intervention. And the government office has been funded to staff. And so that collaborative applicant is staffed with people who are really doing the work of the COC, right? And then we have another example where, yes, there are government employees, but there are also these appointed commissions and nonprofits and this kind of blended leadership model through a kind of committee governance in a way, right? And then we have this coalition model where, yes, there's two different COCs that have different collaborative applicant structures, but the coalition itself is staffed to carry out certain activities. And these are examples of the activities they're carrying out. But if we think of it that way in terms of kind of different models of how work is being done rather than the details of the exact work at the moment, which we do appreciate your feedback on. But if we could just kind of center feedback there for a moment, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think there's a general consensus that we like the idea of staffing for the Homeless Coalition as a 501c3 to support all whatever initiatives we come up with.
Yeah, I think what matters is how we do it.
Right, which we can get into the weeds later.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, idea number 2.
All right, thanks. So one idea that has risen to the surface a lot, especially beginning with conversations about home art funding, is the idea of having a low barrier non-congregate shelter. So many of the issues that we have spoken to both providers and clients and community members, quite frankly, about is that there's not really anywhere for everyone to fully be during the day, and people need to leave the place where they're sleeping. And so somewhere that is 24-hour, minimal to no entry requirements. And so there's different models of how these non-congregate shelters have been established. One model that was very popular during COVID was purchasing hotels. But very often these projects could convert to transitional or permanent housing if need be. Many of the communities that implemented hotels for non-congregate shelter during COVID are now trying to convert those or have converted those to some kind of very low income or permanent supportive housing. So one example we have is the Gloria Center. I'm going to say this wrong. The Dalles, Oregon. Okay. And this is a new facility. Different phases of it have been constructed, but the intent is that it is an all-encompassing navigation center. So it houses joint services that people can walk into that aren't staying there. It has a shelter. It also has inclement weather areas that can open up, and it has some transitional housing units that are essentially like ADU tiny home village kind of things. And with that, I will turn it back to the committee for feedback on impact, feasibility, anything else.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if we were to build that, it would take a lot more than $5 million.
Right.
But I think there's definitely some components that we could do to address some of that.
I also have a hard time jumping on board of something totally new when the existing shelters are hardly funded by the government here. I really do. It's hard for me to advocate for that.
I'll say, I think in terms of a navigation center, I do think we have locations that can serve as navigation centers already existing. I picture this being like if we took the day center and added a gym to it and turned that into a shelter space or inclement weather space with a tiny home village behind it. And so it's like, rather than doing all of that, I think that maybe we just find a space that we can turn into our inclement weather emergency shelter, which we did with Lay Park Gym this past winter, which I think could be cool to formalize an inclement weather plan.
We'll get into inclement weather in a minute. Yes. And again, like this is just an example of how another community did it. They just built it from the ground up, right? Like there's been conversations in the community about maybe acquiring a hotel and just renovating and rehabbing some of those units into shelter space, non-congregate shelter that, or transitional or PSA, you know, whatever the transition is. That's a lot cheaper than building from the ground.
I just don't know how we talk about that when we're not really funding the existing shelters. That's just a really hard conversation for me to navigate.
So I guess my question though is if we're talking about it in Athens, could funding something like that mean funding an existing organization already doing the work? Like that, can those two things be the same? You know, could the money go towards adding a second floor to Barber Street or something like that? You know, would that be in the same vein, you know?
And I mean, and I'm not trying to make this specific to our organization at all, but in the Arch Village project, there are 20 units that were designed to be emergency or transitional shelter, but their ACC won't fund it. And so they're not being utilized that way. They're still being utilized for vulnerable families, but they're not being utilized for exactly what we are talking about building here. And that to me just is insane.
Well, I think we're also talking about two different populations too. The village is, you know, for families with children, you know, so that in and of itself is exclusive to that population, not individuals, not high need, high severe and persistent mental illness, co-occurring substance use, in and out of the jails, in and out of the hospitals.
Well, I would
Some of
disagree
what
with
they're
that
talking
part.
about- Well, some of the families, you know, or the parents, or maybe even the juveniles too, but still, I think, and it's also not necessarily a low barrier either.
Yeah. it
When you
is.
look into the context of someone with that type of, you know, are they actively using, can they actively use?
It is
and they-
low barrier.
Okay.
The way we're operating it, it is.
So
Whether or not we could at full capacity depends on the funding. I mean, it depends on how secure we can make it. That's just an example. I'm really not trying to make it focused on one agency or location at all.
Actually, I think that's really important feedback. So I just want to be clear, we're not necessarily talking about building a new facility. In the example we gave, they did build a new facility because they didn't have anything like this in the community. We're talking about the idea of low barrier, non-congregate shelter. So it maybe what I'm hearing is that way that looks is fully funding something like this project that's being referenced in the arches. So I just want to make it very clear that, you know, we're not necessarily talking about building a new facility. Maybe the strategy is fully funding that project, and that's how something like this actually gets carried out, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, too, with this, we're talking about one-time bucket of money. And so we're not talking about service dollars. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about.
Yes.
You have the facility. What you need is service dollars in order to, you know, operate that program. This money is actually development money. It's a one-time thing.
That's the point I've been making about this money from the start, is that the longer we take to get it into the community, the more it's relegated to just being a project budget, capital money. Because it can't be, I mean, at the point now that we are, by the time it gets into the community, it can't responsibly be used to increase services.
Well, I think, yeah, and the time frame on this is what, 2026 or is it 2030?
End of home ARP is 2030
Oh,
and ARPA is end of 2026. So we have,
the 5 million.
5 million.
we're talking about.
5 million,
Yeah.
2026, 2.5 million, 2030.
And I mean, let's be real, it's not gonna get out into the community, maybe next year. I hope next year.
It has to be out this year.
Good, awesome.
And, you know, the other thought, and we've talked about this multiple times, is, you know, this is a strategic plan that's supposed to be more than just the 7.5 million. But if we have no commitment from the government or from the coalition or whoever it might be to like continue to fund these things,
Yeah.
that's when it kind of is, it's hard in my mind to figure out the difference, like, because we're really talking about the hard dollars, because that's all we know that we're gonna get.
We're making one of the
Yeah.
ideas too of funding that position on their homeless coalition, like
Is
one
to
of their
bring in
jobs
more.
is fundraising.
Correct, yeah.
Well, that's part of my excitement with the homeless coalition.
Yeah.
From the sustainability standpoint is possibly, and I mean, the key is hiring the right person, getting the right, infrastructure, but having a nonpartisan type body out there advocating for this and creating a fund from a sustainable perspective so that we can get local resources to fund ongoing services within these existing establishments. That's what I'm hoping there.
Exactly.
With that.
Which is why, yes, I agree with you. And it's why it's so important how we set it up and how we make those decisions. Because as director of an independent agency, it's terrifying to think of letting go of some fundraising niche for our services and happily handing it off, hoping that we'll get that back. Does that,
Yeah.
I know you must feel that too. I know you
Yeah.
we fight hard for every dollar.
And I think, again, once we get down to the nitty gritty of what that job description is gonna be, right? Because all of you as agencies, you're still gonna have to do your own grant writing, right? But there could be a person who's also looking more strategically, and maybe they find like a family-focused grant. They're like, hey, Shay, right? Like, look at this one. Hey, you know what I mean? So I think it's all building with each other. We're not trying to replace anything or take money away. It's the opposite. We're trying to find ways to bring more.
And this plan, like speaking of strategy, is that this plan is a strategic plan. This isn't just a plan for what to do with the money, but also how do you want to reduce and prevent homelessness in Athens, right? So one of the ways you can do that, regardless of how it's funded, whether that is with ARPA dollars, home ARP dollars, or money that this coalition staff person will raise, do we like the idea of low barrier non-congregate shelter, whether or not it's built from the ground up or it is sufficiently funding some structure that already exists? Like, how do we feel about the idea of low barrier non-congregate shelter?
We have it and we need more.
It seems like.
This is definitely a gap. So.
Okay, great. And do we think that, like, aside from deciding what pot of money it comes from, that this is like something that is feasible to put into practice?
Some places are already doing it. So yeah.
Okay. Great. See, you all agree, I think, on more things than you think. I think it's easy to get bogged down in tiny details, but first, I think we all need to agree on big picture. What are the big picture strategies, right? And so already we've talked about the need for a strong coalition with staff members that can help do fundraising and lead strategies, right? And like the value of low barrier non-congregate shelter. And I know Scott has like a list of several other strategies and that we really want to hear from you. Not getting too far into the weeds. There will be so much time to get into the weeds, but that time is not in the next hour and 11 minutes.
Thank you. So another strategy that we discussed with ACC Gov as potentially high impact and high feasibility is establishing a flexible housing fund. And just to be very, very clear, this is different than the idea of like a housing trust fund, both in how it operates and then how it's funded. So this is not a capital fund. And so these are pools of flexible resources to be able to really resolve barriers that traditional federal funding does not pay for. So one example you may have heard about already is in Chattanooga. They have one of these funds. And just to say, Chattanooga is a regional COC. So even though we call it that, it's actually the whole southeast corner, but they really operate on this just enough assistance model. So what is really the least amount of money that can be given to stabilize? It is just for people meeting that HUD definition. And so different agencies submit to their coalition for review, and then the coalition is the payment entity out of this. And again, it's used for very, very, very limited costs that are really intended to resolve those immediate barriers to housing. And so just in terms of the details, again, is this something that would be an impact? Is this something that is feasible? We have talked about different ways that this might be funded long-term, or with some of these short-term funds as really just a pilot to see what the outcomes are. So there's different details to sort out there, but.
Go ahead, John.
Certainly think it's interesting. I guess my thoughts around this are what differences there are between Athens and Chattanooga specifically with what units are we putting people into? And is this allowing us to access units that we're not already accessing for because we have rapid rehousing dollars, we have Georgia housing voucher dollars, we have different funding streams for housing services already. So what additional housing units does this allow us to get into that we're not already getting into?
I think the difference is that it's gonna give you more flexible spending, right? Because with all the housing dollars you have right now, there's a cap, right? You can only give a certain amount of dollars per household. So if they need just one more rent or one more monthly payment, like this is a funding that could potentially support that. So it's a complement to what you're already doing.
So I'm thinking,
When we met with the director of the COC in Chattanooga, I mean, he was pretty up on this fund that they use, right? He gave hard figures and attributed it to a fund similar. Well, I mean, you're talking about the exact same one, but I mean, it certainly grabbed my attention, and I think everybody on that Zoom kind of stopped and was like, wow.
I think what confuses me in that is that it would be for people meeting HUD definition. We have programs that will cover most things for people who are HUD definition homeless. We have a huge population of people that don't quite fit the very narrow HUD definitions of homelessness that really are where we run into the most trouble with being able to use our money.
And those are the people that often may or may not need a full 12-month, rapid.
Yes.
Like those are the people that could probably be fine if they just got through the door.
Yes, and again, I'm looking at details, but a lot of these are things we have been talking about for a long time, and it's these details that if we don't go into them getting right, we're not going anywhere.
This is just Chattanooga's
It doesn't have to have the HUD definition.
Oh,
but-
This is how
This is their decision. HUD did not put this down on them. This is
This is their decision. They created this program. So this isn't even federal dollars because
Gotcha.
this is the program that they made that we're giving as one example of how this has operated and what it looks like. So their program.
And with all of these examples, we just want to be really clear that these are examples of what it could look like, not that we ever, with any of these, want to pick up a project from another community and plop it down in Athens.
Right.
Right? Like that is not what we're suggesting. We are saying like, hey, somebody has done something like this. There are some things that you might be interested in and some things that you're going to immediately hear and be like, we like it, but not that. Right?
Right.
It's something to react to and jump off of and not we have to do exactly what this other community did.
Right. I think the thing that we have to keep in mind about a flexible housing fund is as a COC, if you determine how that money's going to be used, as long as you continuously use it by that strategy, and as long as you're following your own policies and procedures about how it's allocated, it doesn't have those federal restrictions, those state restrictions. It's a lot more flexible. Maybe you have somebody that can afford a little bit above the FMR. You're not stuck with the FMR for a rent rate. It gives you that flexibility as long as you're following your own standards.
Well, and are using our own money, not HUD dollars.
Right, the flexible funding.
And I think that's another big, important detail here.
Yeah, this would really, the idea is that, I'm sorry, Madison.
Oh, no.
The idea is that it would be funded through non-HUD programs, right? Whether that's local fundraising, whether that's just maybe the local government, it's a little line item in the budget, et cetera. So
That's where
it's
the
completely
flexibility comes in.
It's flexible for that.
Don't say it, we're that easy to add lines to the budget.
So that's actually how Chattanooga does it they are in their budget. So I think that is an interesting thing that, you know, we would need to explore, but they get, I believe it's $4 million of the.
But you have to think about a population.
Right.
difference. We'd be scaling that.
Which is city money, not HUD money.
Correct. So,
Yeah.
so that's right. But I just wanted to mention, you know, Family Promise, much smaller, and we don't have the HUD definitions for a lot of the funding that we get. And so we have a very, very small version of this in our diversion program. It is just flexible money that when people need things like application fees or a little bit of rent or a little bit of a security deposit, we can do. It's wonderful. I really love it. I wish it was bigger. You know, I think that it's something that we all can see with the empty stocking fund that only goes for 1 month, how great that is to have that pot. So like for service providers to have an easy way to go to one source to get that money is awesome.
I'll just say, I like what Jason whispered to me earlier, was that the key word here is flexible.
It's the first word in the name.
And so I think it's up to us to decide, you know, how flexible we want to be. And, you know, and honestly, a big determinant of that is how much is that pot? We'll determine how flexible we can be.
Right.
Because if we start saying, okay, well, yeah, we can use this money for rent for people that aren't necessarily HUD homeless. Well, that's going to take, depending on how many families, we're talking 6 figures of, you know, of money right there. From my standpoint with this, and I'll just say this from me, I'm not interested in using this for rent, arrears, utility deposits, or anything like that, because we get money for that. What we lose money in is repairs to units of people who aren't quite ready or in that space. And we're constantly having to deal with all of that. We spend on average between $80,000 and $150,000 every year on repairs to our units. So
You can choose.
And this is something that, you know, it could live within the Athens Area Community Foundation, right? It's something that could grow. It's not just, you know, stocking funds. You know what I mean? Okay, so general consensus is something we want to explore further,
I love
how to do it.
I think part of the problem that I'm yes, to answer your question, but I think part of the problem I'm having is that we have had to fight tooth and nail for every dollar that comes from our city government. I think all of us in this room would agree to that goes to services. And so I hesitate to spend a whole lot of time investing and talking and getting excited about these ideas that are not going to work unless the government is willing to allocate money to them regularly. And I don't think we've heard anything that indicates that. I haven't heard anything that indicates
Well,
that.
keep in mind, that flexible fund is not specific only to county funds. It's
Sure.
a flexible pot of money that is coming from potentially numerous.
Yes, I'm talking about all of these at this point.
Yeah.
I don't see how we can do many of them without the government making some commitments. And I know you guys can't do that. I'm not trying to point at you. I'm just saying, I don't know how much time to invest in this without that
That is sure.
buy-in
Yeah.
from our local government.
Well, I can tell you that we're doing this plan because they told us that they want a plan, right? So it was mayor and commission dictated that they wanted to see this plan for future programs, right? Like that hasn't,
They have
like
to
a very
approve it.
specific plan. Yeah, they have,
They can amend it,
yeah,
right?
right.
Well, and also.
Then if they vote on it-
Strategy,
this gives us.
as a high priority strategy, it kind of puts some
Yeah.
pressure on to say, we need to focus on
Yeah,
this.
this is an added tool to the arsenal to advocate for additional funds from
Right.
something like this. Add some legitimacy to the argument.
Yeah, but point written down, Shay, without local funding, local government funding, it's gonna be challenging. Yes. All right.
If I could just add, you really have to start with defining your aspirations, just defining the things that you're going to try to get to. Because for all of these strategies, the resources have to come from multiple places. But if you have a plan, you'll be able to go to your state government, you'll be able to go to your private foundations and say, what role can you play in contributing to this? What role can ACC play in contributing to this? And I saw that this worked in Lane County. They started off with an aspirational plan. I asked many of the same questions. Where is the money going to come from? And it turned out that it really worked over time. But you have to start with some agreement around what you're going to focus on and as your first steps.
And this,
That's the next.
yeah, I was just gonna say, you do have some funding, right? Like you have the ARPA funds, at least short term, and then you have existing funding like ESG, CDBG. And so this can help, I think, focus how even current funding is being spent. All right, next strategy. Thinking about landlord focused strategy. So I know you all are doing a landlord survey, and this can include engagement, incentives, risk mitigation pools. In the best cases, these are all working together. Some communities do implement different pieces of landlord focused strategies separately. So one example here of how a landlord-focused strategy is working is actually Open Doors. They serve 7 metro Atlanta counties, and this is a dedicated nonprofit for landlord engagement. That is what this nonprofit does. Obviously, we're not talking about creating a new nonprofit in Athens, just this one example. And their role is to engage property owners. They have different events and newsletters and things, and like badges to be able to recognize contributions that different landlords or property groups are making. They deliver very focused incentives to encourage property owners to sign on to the program and house people. This not just people experiencing homelessness, but also maybe like, you know, veterans or other people with high housing barriers. To lower their criteria for acceptance, and they assist with application fees, and they also have a risk mitigation pool for damages and move out, and not included on the slide, but they have received funding during special housing surges in the past to hold units, so they can kind of master lease units basically, and then they can be vacant for a period of time while agencies work to fill those vacancies. So I'll pause there. Again, obviously a separate 7-county nonprofit is not going to work. There might be even some possibility though of like working with Open Doors as an established organization in Georgia, or taking some of these strategies internal to think about something a staff person for the coalition could do in terms of these kinds of engagement activities. But just on its face, how do we feel about these broad landlord focused strategies?
If this group is interested, I know the person who founded this program, and it's a great program. He's been able to do a lot of great things within the counties, and actually I kind of teased him about just trying to get into Athens.
Let's get him here.
And do that. But if people are interested, I can get him to come to a meeting and speak to just the logistics and the nuts and bolts of what he had to do and what he had to accomplish and that kind of thing.
Let's board him and have him open a chapter here.
I know that the Landlord Engagement Committee from the Homeless Coalition's actually been doing a lot of great work and gotten some new members that are really focused, and it's been pretty exciting. So I think that would be great.
So generally speaking, we want to do landlord engagement activities. Look more into what that might look like. And I think a lot of that will be based on what we get from that survey, right? That'll help inform it. And yes, Cloudburst is going to get all that data from that survey.
Yeah. And we also, I'll just say with this specifically, since there did seem to be interest in Open Doors specifically, Cloudburst did their evaluation and work with the enterprise. So we are also familiar with them, and they're great. I will echo that. Okay. So, 5th strategy we're discussing are different partnerships for employment. So there are different models of how different community organizations, entities have come together to really focus on employment programs for people who are exiting homelessness. That there are vocational rehab programs specifically for people exiting homelessness. The Chamber of Commerce here, I know, has expressed interest in getting involved with these efforts. So one example is the Gulf Coast America's Job Center. These are called different things. Sometimes they're called one-stops. But that particular job center has a program for people exiting homelessness. It's modeled similarly to like a Ban the Box campaign. Is really a kind of like a second chance employment, recognizing that not all people experiencing homelessness are going to have criminal records, but many do, just as an impact of having experienced homelessness itself. So they coordinate between service providers and employers, and they work to get employers who are willing to hire people who are exiting homelessness, who might have some barriers to employment, and really educate them on, you know, what, like things that I just said of, like, you know, if you see a lot of things like trespassing charges, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. They might have got it, you know, that just as a result of losing their housing. And then working to understand what skills that the person experiencing homelessness has, and really serve as like a matchmaker between these, you know, employers and people with some very light touch employment supports there. So that's one way that these programs have operated.
Yeah.
I guess in my experience, I don't know that a lot of my population has the barriers with finding a job, more so the ability to, and the skill set and the stability to sustain a job. And that's where, you know, it's like, hey, if we're gonna put this person into housing and try to move them straight from unsheltered or sheltered homelessness into housing, and they need to maintain sobriety, take their mental health meds, go to all their appointments, and remember to go to work when they live next door to somebody who is, you know, who they're doing their dope with, that is more of the employment barrier rather than
Actually getting it.
actually getting a job. They can go out and get a job pretty easily when they're focused. The harder thing is keeping them focused and housing them somewhere for whether it's for treatment or whether it's for a, you know, in rapid rehousing or even in PSH in a place that they're not surrounded by a lot of people doing dope or drinking.
Yeah, all those temptations. Yeah.
I know that one of the chamber's main areas of emphasis right now is workforce development. So I think that would probably, I mean, could lead to some additional conversations.
Right.
Trade programs would be really cool, so that to build skill sets while they're in some sort of transitional or stability program, that they can develop a trade that they can go and make a lot more money and not need the system anymore. Now, that being said, I think the hardest part is giving them a place where they can have stability long enough to sustain, at least, and again, this is my population, mostly individuals, chronic homeless, SPMI, substance use.
I think, you know, one thing about all of us are working with people who are experiencing homeless, and they have different barriers to reasons why they may be able to not be able to obtain employment. To a lot of the people that you're working with, you're naming a lot of those barriers. You know, for us, it is kind of like what I talked about at the panel around the gaps in their work history, and being able to explain some of that, and having to job hop a lot and been explained that. And so for them, it is the obtaining of the job that is the challenge for them. And again, it's just depending on the different populations that we work with. The barriers look different for different reasons.
And our populations, I think, are looking for different types of jobs too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Families, like, you know, we get parents told, if you have a kid, this is not the job for you. So, you know, some sort of way of coordinating service providers to educate employers on, hey, you know, these are the hours that working parents can work or whatnot. I mean, I think.
Or build a daycare.
Okay. All right. So yeah, and we know the chamber is generally like responsive and interested in doing something like this. So seems like there's general consensus. This is something to look more into. Yeah. Okay. It's another.
All right, moving right along. talking and looking at diversion and rapid exit. So these are two different things that are very often implemented together and sometimes conflated. But so diversion is the idea that people actually do not spend one night without a place to stay, even if it's a temporary place to stay, but they don't spend a night in shelter. And then rapid exit is generally defined as they did spend one night in shelter and then they are able to leave very quickly. And so this is really problem-solving case management, and it does work best when it is paired with flexible spending, although there are examples of communities that have diversion-focused caseworkers that don't have any flexible spending. So one example of this is in Grand Traverse County, Michigan. So also kind of a smaller continuum of care. They have the county there, so the county government employs a diversion worker, and they engage clients at least once a day. So there is very frequent and, kind of high intensity contact. And they can provide very limited services and financial assistance for about a month. And really the focus is on identifying alternate housing solutions. So maybe even if it's a temporary place to stay, like you could stay with your friend while we work on these other issues. The idea is that would be better than shelter for a lot of people. And so they do have a flex fund attached to this. So it covers those kind of standard flex fund costs that we looked at with Chattanooga, like application fees. But theirs goes a little bit further, and they will pay for things like grocery cards, work and education expenses. Like, maybe you need, maybe you got a job offer, but you need a uniform of, black pants and a polo shirt. So to pay for things like that. Transportation and also relocation. So if someone would like to leave the county or the area to be, reunified with a family member, or they have a place to stay that they've identified, but they don't have a way to get there, they will pay for that. And this also includes dispute resolution with landlords. So maybe, there was an issue with the landlord over, hey, you're leaving garbage out all over the porch, so you've got to go. Working in those kinds of cases, as well as cases where people have been kicked out of family and friends' house, to help resolve those issues so that the person can continue to stay there for at least some period of time. And I will turn it back to you for feedback of, impact, feasibility, and what would it take to make something like this work in Athens?
We had something that was somewhat similar years ago, Job Track, that did the employment and transportation, even grocery piece of it. Having run it, I'll say it was a mess to run, but it helped
was
a lot of
cake when I was running it, so.
There was no end to the need, that's for sure. No end to the need for those things.
Yeah,
And I think it was a big gap when the program when the government decided not to fund it anymore.
we do this, like I said, on a really small level. I mean, it's great when you have the flexible funding. It goes really fast. It takes a lot of time and assistance to really find those other places, and without money, and if it's just the mediation part, it's really, really hard. So I think money is imperative.
Money specifically for staffing or money for the flexible?
The flexible fund and a staff, but yeah, similar to the other flexible funds.
Is this something that's worth for us to keep looking into, that you would want to see
I think
as a strategy?
if we move forward with the flexible housing fund, we would have to determine, what the end game.
It kind of seems like this is a natural extension of that. And I noticed that I read somewhere it pairs well with it, but you couldn't have that flex fund without having
Case management.
Yeah, attached to it and criteria, some sort of criteria for what, yeah. So they
Kind
seem
of inherently
very,
go together.
they seem, yeah, they're kind of the same to me.
I guess the biggest difference would be, does the case management happen on the service provider level or on the coalition level? So that would be,
That's kind of a money question
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
When we were kind of discussing these strategies, I believe that Cloudburst had suggested that these be separate. And then that way, so this would be like a coalition based, one of the staff people would be doing this intensive case management. But again, that would be, up for discussion if that's what you wanted to pursue.
Like as the coordinated entry process, becomes more expansive with these increased positions, right? Then this position makes more sense in that they understand, if there are cases that y'all are, sending forward that.
Any other thoughts on this one? All right.
The whole flexible funding piece, and I'm just trying to, maybe I'm getting way ahead of the cart here, but looking at the idea around the coalition, having an entity that's sort of, above, not in the weeds with the providers providing the case management, incurring the cost for these flexible funds and submitting for reimbursement to the coalition. That could be a nightmare if things weren't set up. And then we could start to look at the coalition like someone was looking at HCD going, oh, rejected the reimbursement again? What is it this time? A timesheet? What's going on?
Too soon, Em, too soon.
Somebody had someone kicked back.
I live with these things, but what I'm saying is, if we need to have specific hardline requirements and documentation requirements and timing and all of that kind of stuff and eligible criteria as far as who the participants are, that kind of stuff, that if we want to make it flexible, we have to be cautious that we really lose the flexibility of it.
Yeah, there needs to be some sort of guidelines. They can't just be, here's a dollar, here's a dollar, right? It still needs to be somewhat structured,
Exactly.
but much more flexible than the hot dollars.
And I think that having that person who's key, like who's good at fundraising, right? And understands the data that's necessary for fundraising as well, the data that you pump back out again, right? At the end of your, back to those people who are giving you those big bucks in theory, right?
So there's gonna be a lot of work into this whole thing, because you've got one person that's wanting to fundraise, but that's not someone who I would want having to look and review reimbursement requests.
No, I mean, those are two jobs.
Yeah.
At
Full
least,
jobs,
those are at least two.
if they're done well.
If they're done well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as we get further in the process and we really look into what kind of positions we'd want to fund in the coalition, et cetera, that's where we would come back to y'all again to imagine what those roles would be, right? Like maybe there's that executive director focused much more on the fundraising, general overarching coordination, but then there's the
Flexible fund.
program person who's doing the reimbursements, et cetera. There's room to play with that, but yeah.
It sounds like in general, though, people do like the idea of pursuing this in some way. Is that accurate?
at some point, do we need to say no to something? I mean, I'm just wondering, I could,
They're all things we all do to varying degrees.
I could say yes to all of them. I think they're all great ideas, but at what point do we need to narrow down? I don't know the answer to that.
I think we can combine three of them into one.
Yeah.
How many more are there?
Have multiple strategies that you prioritize. You
Okay.
have these as lower level strategies.
Right.
With your hires as number 1, 2.
Yeah, and over the next month or so, we're gonna get to that prioritization step. We're not there yet. Right now, you can say yes to everything you
Yes,
want.
everything. Okay, sounds great.
All right. Thank you. All right. So another strategy we have discussed is establishing a comprehensive street outreach program. So these programs are generally cross-sector collaborations and include the entire geography. So one example, we've tried to stay away from larger cities, but I think with street outreach, it's just the idea here from Philadelphia. They do a very good job of this. So their RFP that goes out for street outreach funding, it requires cross-agency collaboration. And so the city is divided into zones with schedules. So even though it is a larger city, right, the idea of having some kind of zone and schedule that could apply to a smaller group like Athens. And they, again, these cross-sector teams include both behavioral health and non-behavioral health. And the reason for this practice is behavioral health outreach is great. And a lot of times it's the opposite, right? In a lot of communities where they have outreach but no behavioral health at the table, Athens kind of has the opposite where the outreach is with behavioral health. Which again, it provides a lot of fantastic services and openings for people. However, there is, some feedback and from an experience in other communities that when this is the case, sometimes people who have had bad experiences with behavioral health, and I don't mean that in terms of the agency not doing a good job, but just maybe they have relapsed or they've been encouraged to stop using substances when they don't want to, or to take medication when they don't want to. But those kinds of individuals may be more reluctant to engage with outreach. And so it is good to have both a behavioral health approach and a non-behavioral health approach. And so these workers work to build relationships with touch points, which I know your outreach is already doing. So working with the hospitals and the library to get to know people. And the outreach itself has a prioritization list of clients, right? So there's like the by name list that you're using for housing, but there's an outreach prioritization list. People to make contact with, get document ready, and get into housing. And so that is how it operates in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I think, do you want to clarify?
So, I love the idea of zones with schedules. That's something we're already trying to build between our powerful team of 1.5, and now that you just hired another person, 2.5, which is great. We don't have behavioral health staff in our outreach right now, so we're housed in Advantage, but I am not a clinician, and I have a peer who works with me full time with street outreach. So I think we actually are non-behavioral health. We just happen to live at an agency that has behavioral health in the name. So a lot of what you're saying that were some of the pitfalls of behavioral health, I'll just go ahead and we are the ones that are talking to people about trying to build more openness to behavioral health supports and saying, hey, you don't have to take your meds. Hey, they're not going to lock you up in a hospital. Hey, it's okay that you've started using again. Do you have Narcan? And taking a harm reduction lens to what we do. So building on that, but I do like the idea too of like a prioritization list of clients. Growing street outreach, I think, is always comprehensive, because it's like if we're working with 150, 200 people outside, a lot of people outside, then it's like at some point we're just giving them supplies but not able to truly follow up unless those are the people that are really pushing for it.
Do you think it could be beneficial though to have other organizations collaborating with you on the street outreach effort that don't have the name, right? Because sometimes, I don't know, when you go out to street outreach and do you just say you're John, or do you attach the name Advantage Behavioral Health to yourself?
I usually will say I work at the day center on North Avenue.
Right. And I think that there could still be, some of what they're saying today. I'm not saying that there is necessarily. You're obviously the expert on that, but do you think that there could be a benefit to having more than just your organization collaborating on the street outreach?
There is. That exists already. There's a lot of outreach groups. There's the Backpack Project and Athens PBJ at the very least that are doing a lot of outreach, and there's a lot of organizations. Homelessness does a level of outreach too. So that exists already.
And you guys are working with the cops too. You work with the police.
There's also the police.
Yeah,
department.
absolutely.
These activities are already happening.
And are you collaborating in some way with the backpack project and et cetera, there's coordination of who's focusing on what zones, et cetera, or not quite yet?
Well, so I mean,
To different purposes, right?
yeah, they're doing different things. They're not literal service providers. They're volunteers going out and spending time with people and connecting, giving them whatever resources they have to offer. So, there are outreach in some degree. I wouldn't say it's case management focused and connection services focused outreach.
But you've got programs like, the free clinic and, some other, programs out there. So yeah, these, again, I think that's what we're finding with these is that these are things, activities that are typically already happening. It's, an opportunity to expand the capacity of that. And, I'll just say one thing, no, it doesn't, and it should never be one organization doing one kind of, or doing this service, because one organization cannot meet all the needs of someone. So it should never be like that. But I would also want to caution against just because behavioral health folks are out there, we are not pushing behavioral health. That is not what we are about. We're very much harm reduction and very much about engagement and strategy. If there is any benefit to having someone that's behavioral health, is to promote access to the behavioral health if and when the individual demonstrates or expresses a desire to need that. But I just wanted to clarify that for the Cloudburst group too, that behavioral health clinicians, it should not be assumed that, well, they're not going to be able to engage with this person because this person doesn't want to stop using it. That hasn't been our experience.
Yeah, we're not assuming that at all. It's generally, again, just a best practice if there is a behavioral health organization, whether it's a clinician or not, to have a non-behavioral health organization participating in some way. So it sounds like that is happening to some extent. So perhaps, again, the implementation of what the strategy would look like is really kind of formalizing some of that coordination and helping to organize it. And we're not trying to say, again, that Advantage isn't doing a good job or anything like that. Not at all. Again, it's just kind of that the idea of a comprehensive street outreach strategy.
And I just want to say with that comes where are these people going? Because my biggest thing in street outreach, you could give us a street outreach team a 10 and we can try to, build strong relationships with these people, use motivational interviewing, support their autonomy to make an autonomous decision to do things that will better their situation. And then we're going to house them at a place where they're going to live next to a drug dealer and fall right back and not be set up for success. And so I think part of increasing street outreach is giving street outreach for working for these unsheltered, living in the woods, SPMI, substance use disorder population, a place to, or more kind of opportunity on where they'll go. Because most people I know want to engage and want to improve. I have a hard time following through with giving them something that'll set them up for success.
Right. And this would, of course, be complementing the other strategies that we're talking about, to your point. Yeah.
So we say,
Oh, you say yes?
I'll say yes, and I would love to complement the outreach program that y'all have. I mean, it has been, I feel like it's been very successful, and I would love to see it expanded.
Yeah. Yay for your extra person. It's 2.5, that's a big thing. Okay, so general consensus is figure it out, further explore it. Okay.
All right. Yes. So speaking of coordination, so talking about strengthening coordinated entry. So I also, in addition to this, I do quite a bit of TA around coordinated entry, and there's a number of pieces to coordinated entry. So everything from access, so how are you getting connected? How are we prioritizing people in a standardized way that has a policy attached and a standardized assessment tool, as well as case conferencing. And so with that, making sure that that all of the needed voices are at the table in terms of how we're doing that. We're going to make sure that the policy reflects values and goals of your continuum. So that might mean, hey, we really are, have a goal of, some people are really focused on ending veterans homelessness. So we're going to really focus on that, or really focusing on racial equity in our work. And so we are going to bake that into our policies. So developing a lot of structures to facilitate that improved access and consistent assessment and prioritization, monitoring, evaluation, improvement, the whole thing, as well as like leveraging that data continuously for decision making. So how are we doing? Can we do it better? Now that we know this about our community, now that we know this about the humans that we serve, what should we do with our policies? And then there's also that possibility of coordinated access to shelter. So some coordinated entry systems include shelter, and some don't. And so coordinated access of shelter can look like one place that people go to that knows what all the different beds are in town and what their different eligibility requirements are, and are able to connect people to the appropriate shelter bed or unit for them and their household.
You're all already doing some of this. So again,
Yeah.
kind of
And in theory, 211 should cover that. In theory.
in theory, yes.
It's one option that we've discussed.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean managing coordinated entry. I mean being the point of reference for anyone, knowing what's available and what's required to get in there. I don't think they should handle coordinated entry.
Right. And I think they're like, it's easy to say, to pick one part of coordinated entry and say, this is what coordinated entry is, but really it is an entire system that encompasses all these different pieces, right? Everything from access to referral, and, monitoring and evaluation.
Have there been places that are successful with a strong coordinated entry system like this that covers everything, that have so many service providers that are not on HMIS? Because we have plenty, not one.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. Does Bigger Vision use HMIS now?
Recently, since January.
I think our shelters all do now, but definitely the periphery service providers.
Right.
Well, yeah, but you guys have your own system. I would think that availability could probably be shared somehow, yeah.
Yeah, there are ways to ensure that people, like individual clients or individual organizations who are not using HMIS, can participate effectively in their coordinated entry system. Like you look at domestic violence victim service providers who are unable to participate in HMIS. And so, yes, there are communities who have developed really effective ways of making sure that both humans being served by VSPs, as well as humans who don't want their information in HMIS, as well as organizations, like in some places, like a gospel mission, who don't want to participate in HMIS, right? Is it ideal for some of those latter options that aren't about client safety or client choice? No, but you can't let that get in the way, and there are ways to move forward for that.
And again, this is something that could potentially live within those homeless coalition staff people, right? This is something.
Yes, and we are gonna figure out how to fund and hire.
Yeah, but we're already looking into those streaming funds.
Provide structure for it.
So this is one more thing that could potentially fall under those positions, something else that they help further develop those policies and coordinate, et cetera. Because I know y'all don't have time to be doing.
I think for me, I don't know. I don't think I know what a good version of coordinated entry looks like in comparison to what we're doing. So like, if there is an example, like a graph or I don't know, something that outlines kind of that would be helpful for me just to understand what are we doing and what are we not doing that other people are doing in community entry? Because I don't know.
We only do it for rapid rehousing, right?
But we use it also for referrals to shelter plus care.
We're doing that case by case kind of, like case referrals and case management side of things really, really well. I 100%. I think those meetings every week are so productive and they get people referred in the right way, effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, we're doing better than ever.
Better than.
So nice to hear someone say that.
And I'm coming in right new to this system, right? And I'm seeing it from that. And I think that's totally working. What we're talking about on this end is saying, okay, all those steps before we get to that, because it's almost like that's like the last step, if you will, right? That we're doing. And then let's streamline it from the beginning to just make that to just do what we're already doing better.
Yeah, I guess I just don't see how to do that, but I would love to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, some coordinated entries have that central intake service where everybody applies there. And then that entity then, based on their knowledge of what programs provide what, make those referrals. But they've already collected the information, they've done the application, and then they send the referral. And then the agency has the ability to either pick up that referral through coordinated entry or spit it back and say, we don't have any availability, and then it can go to the next. But it's one stop shop.
In Birmingham work?
They would just have.
There are many cities that have
a
coordinated entry.
Most places do.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different models of how coordinated entry can look, because it is supposed to be based in what works for your community, right? And I mean, this is something where this isn't our space right now, but like your COC board is, responsible for making sure that there is a strong, compliant, coordinated entry, right? So that is something that somebody is going to be looking.
The coordinated entry is that HUD.
We meet the requirements for this. We're not doing it for shelter. We're doing it for rapid rehousing, and we meet the base. We are doing this at a basic level.
Yeah, so I think, expansion of that, like I said, we visited One Roof in Birmingham, and I think that they had a system like this, like you were just talking about, that centralized system. Everyone comes in for intake, then gets sent out accordingly or referred accordingly.
Or others have the dedicated HMIS person.
Right.
Where the individuals do their intake, they put it into the system, and then that person then sends out the referrals. They're not collecting the information, the agencies are, but they're putting it in the system, and then that, which is somewhat similar to what we're doing now. It's just
that you guys are doing that grunt work at first of saying
Exactly.
who you want me to refer.
which
to what
meets
program.
the standards.
I think that with such few people, such few agencies actually providing substantive housing services for unsheltered individuals, it feels like, Advantage is the only primary serving just unsheltered individuals. I know Project Safe serves, single individuals who are survivors. But we have, a couple housing service providers specifically for families. And so we all communicate with each other. And the only time at Advantage that we're really doing a coordinated entry referral is if it's a family, because for an individual, we're just referring them to ourselves.
And I think.
And if it's a survivor, we're saying, hey, you call Project Safe or call Athens-Clarke Homeless Shelter or fill out the form on family property.
I guess what I'm struggling with is how do we do this without putting more work on the agencies? Is there a way that HMIS can have a field added for availability? And how does Project Safe, how do our domestic violence shelters play into that? It seems like a lot of work.
And that's
I'm not
the
saying.
idea behind this, right? How do we make it easier and better to be inclusive of all these different agencies and meet what we need right now?
Yeah, and I don't see families really showing up because they're already so scared to show their faces. And I don't see survivors showing up necessarily because it's not safe.
From my perspective, right, because of just the nature of my position being called the homeless specialist on the HCD website, right? I get emails about 10 to 15 times a day with a ton of people that are noting themselves as domestic violence survivors or families, people with children. And, you know, I refer them as best I can. I send an email with a list of our organizations, right? But imagine if that was a like, you know, a number of a, you know, with a person that is then in HMIS and is automatically sending out that
Great.
right?
Let's find the software.
Well, I think that with all of this, maybe we try to add in, is there room for conversations around client track is essentially what you're talking about, right?
Yes. Well, it's the system we have to use, no matter what.
And I understand, but is there room for conversation with DCA?
Hi.
Working on some of the problems with client track.
Yeah.
Right. So I just want to
That
bring
needs
this.
to be a full-time position too.
Yeah, and it can be, and maybe it's not the first position we fund, but maybe it's the third or the fourth down the line. But generally speaking, it sounds like the idea of finding ways to make this more streamlined.
I don't know.
I don't know how yet, but the idea of.
I think whether or not it works, it all depends on the how.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's gonna be constructive, all depends on the how.
So
Echo Lily's statement said, yeah, it's the same thing with people who call into the homeless day service center all the time. It's like, well, come up here and see if you can talk to somebody, and our, you know, front desk staff or case managers just passing through or just walking into the door from the parking lot are always bombarded by people asking us, hey, I'm this and that. These are all my circumstances, blah, blah, blah. We're like, call Big Vision, call Athens Homeless Shelter. Good luck. I'm busy.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's.
So, can I?
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, it's hard to butt in when you're remote. Thank you. No, but it sounds like, right, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of room for growth and improvement and lots of different ways that can look, from staffing to software to, you know, just generally having greater understanding and assistance with understanding ways that your coordinated entry system could look, right? What does it look like in other communities? What works for you all? There are entire like technical assistance projects around that. This isn't that. So I do want to refocus us a little bit because I do want to be respectful of your time. And it does sound like having a strong coordinated entry, regardless of what that looks like, is something that is a strategy that you all support.
I'm thinking especially if we do get more shelter, like if that non-congregate shelter does increase, you know, having a more coordinated might help with, you know, right now we just have so few, it's like easy that we have one spot, okay, but put this one person in, but if there are however many more, that could be an important side by side.
Right. Thank you all. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward.
Sorry, I have one more comment with that, just for us to be thinking about. I think that the Salvation Army pretty much has to be at the table and in agreement if we're talking about doing that. And they're not here, so I hope that we can make sure they're roped into any conversation about that. That's all.
Thank you. So next, we wanted to discuss the just equity and the involvement of people with lived experience throughout the COC. And so what does involvement mean? It means both leadership roles, committee roles, advisory board roles. It means creating policies for payment for these roles if it's not part of someone's, you know, full-time job that they're being otherwise compensated for. And any necessary shifts that need to take place to make meetings more accessible, and what, you know, resources, education, et cetera, do people need to be able to effectively contribute. So one example of how these this kind of committee is operating in a smaller continuum is Akron, Ohio, Summit County COC. And so they have a lived experience committee, and it serves and represents the entire continuum of care. Organizations, so agencies that are part of the continuum, need to document that they have engaged with people with lived experience or the committee to have meaningful contributions. And so that's part of their rank and review process for, funds. The Lived Experience Committee also assists with research, so different, evaluations, coordinated entry evaluation, things like that, point in time count. They engage in service and program delivery, crafting communications and policy. They also engage with the public. So again, conducting advocacy, awareness, public education efforts, engaging with, those partner sectors. But yes, and I will pause there again for your feedback.
I think this is a huge gap in Athens that is not met. I think that there's a lot of, in my population that I'm working with, of people, I think the recovery community is a great example of a group of people in our community that are advocating for themselves, that are at City Hall, that are organizing, that are making their voices known, and that are implementing positive change and positive outcomes for other people struggling with what they did. And so I really believe that creating more space for people with lived experience is a huge gap in our current homeless coalition and COC and our community as a whole too.
Man, I think that most of the COCs that we've heard about really emphasize having people with lived experience
As
high up the
employees.
food chain.
Yeah. Well, one way that some COCs make sure that people with lived experience, especially active, they have their meetings on site in shelters. So they'll find a shelter that has space, and that's where they'll have their meeting. And they'll do it when they are absolutely aware that clients are going to be available to show up and have part of that conversation. So that's something to consider, is where you're actually having your meetings.
I think right now they're in the library, but I think that's something takes the capacity of our current coalition and COC does not have when we're all working and volunteering our time to do the work. So
I also think it's a delicate thing. It puts people on the spot. And I mean, we have staff members with lived experience, and I might encourage them to participate in things because of that. But I would never say, you have this experience, so go do this. And many of them don't want to be known for that they are experiencing. It's delicate, and it's more complicated than saying it needs to happen.
Yeah, I think
Ways
working on the
to
system
really
to make
make
them
an
feel comfortable
intentional-
doing it is the important thing.
Yeah.
and the number of times like doing outreach and engaging with clients and building like strong relationships with the people I'm working with, and they're talking about what the heck is our stupid city doing with all these dollars, or what the heck are y'all doing? Why are y'all running your programs this way? I don't understand this. We need to change these policies. We need to change these rules. We need to change the way these programs are run. And they have really awesome feedback and really awesome ideas and really awesome ways of advocating for themselves, that it's like, I wish like that I could help you, that you could channel what you're trying to say and you had a space to get that out, that it actually is effective in the community. Because I can try to sit here and translate it. I can try to take note of it and bring it, but how can I create a space that those voices don't have to be translated by someone, that they're authentic and appreciated and welcomed and centered in conversation?
Right, and I think Heather was about to make the point, like, it's all about being intentional about it, right? And no, maybe right now we can't move the meetings out of the library, but like, what are the things that we do have under our control to make things more accessible and to carve out that space?
And it takes a lot of intentionality and a
absolutely.
lot of time.
Absolutely.
And this is one that I think we all want, but is more than anything particular to our community maybe, and I think requires a lot of conversation about how we make it happen in a way that feels good to everyone.
Part of what I was going to say as well, in addition to being intentional about like the culture of the space and that people's voices are actually heard and valued and not just tokenized, right? And also, how are we going to compensate people for doing this work, right? And that's where some communities fall down. And so that's where it requires a lot of planning in addition to good intentions, because good intentions don't pay the rent. I don't know if you have tried to pay your rent with good intentions. I have, it doesn't work, right? And so that is a part where you need to really think about how do you have funds? How do you have good policies for paying people? It's amazing how even people who are currently unsheltered, if you offer to give them a really meaningful voice in a safe space and cash, they will show up. Not everybody wants to show up, but there are people who will show up and they will engage in really effective and amazing ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just want to be mindful of the time. We've got about 10 more minutes. So I know there's a couple other things we wanted to talk about.
I'm going to move through this pretty quickly, but 10 is inclement weather policies. So this is really just like a set policy for inclement weather response. And I know Athens has a lot of spaces that open up, and this really just like formalizes it into a plan and again, a policy of, you know, what are the thresholds? What are the roles and responsibilities of agencies and partners, like, you know, even a church that might be offering spaces. So it's that organizing framework. And so you can click on the link. Lexington, again, has a policy if you're interested. So I'm hoping we could just get a quick thumbs up or down on this and then move to the next one.
This seems like something we should have in the bag. I mean, it's not like we have terrible weather very frequently.
Right.
We need to fix it. We need to have a good plan.
I'm in talks with people.
Awesome,
Just did a FEMA plan.
awesome.
Happening. I will be reaching out to relevant folks soon.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to turn it back to Heather for this last one.
And so this is centralized rent administration. So sometimes like this goes hand in hand with some of that landlord relationship, but also with the enabling service providers to focus on providing services. Having a central entity that pays monthly rents, application fees, security deposits, and other fees across different subsidy or voucher types. So this could include rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, other flexible funds, or landlord risk mitigation type things. So all of the landlords have a relationship with a single entity, so they know when they're getting their rent, they know who to call if it didn't, or if there's issues with getting that rent, with doing any of the paperwork, they know exactly what it looks like. And there are fewer questions. So one example is Home Now Indy in Indianapolis, where there's a affordable housing provider that hosts a COC-wide, both their housing acquisition team, so that landlord engagement, as well as that centralized rent and flex fund payments, grant administration and compliance. So any housing program that participates in the coordinated entry system can use the services of Home Now Indy for their grants.
Yeah, I'm not saying that this is a bad plan, but I think that sounds more like something for a larger city like Indianapolis. For here, I don't see why we would need a central entity to pay rent. We already pay on time. The landlords know who to contact if their rent happens to be late, which it really isn't. But we have good relationships with landlords in the community, and there's never confusion about who's sending the rent or when. And it comes from, our agency is on the check. So I don't quite understand why that was needed in Indianapolis, but I guess it's different.
I mean, just looking at this, maybe this could get revisited under one of the other bullet points.
Well,
There was something to pursue.
also, I think the major rent program, rental paying programs are really from two agencies. And so it's not like we have a huge wide, and I don't know how it would work with the funding we get for it. I don't know how, I mean, there's no way that we would get reimbursed if we didn't pay the rent. Like, the grants would have to transfer.
But it sounds like there might just not be a real need for
I
something
don't
like
think
this.
so.
Okay.
You said no to something.
Hey.
But it's give it a clean 10.
Yeah. All right. So just very quickly in the last couple minutes here, not talking about these in depth, but other bulleted here are some other strategies that we have discussed with ACC Gov. They may or may not end up in the strategic plan, but they are, they did not rise to like that highest level of impact and feasibility of things that we might talk about and highlight today. So we just wanted to hear from you, based on what you heard today, looking at this list, is there anything that we missed that, you've really been hoping to see out of this plan that you didn't so far?
Yeah.
I think something that I've kind of brought up a couple times is some kind of like treatment or like place for people, unsheltered SPMI, substitute disorder, that want to do things differently and have an option to have a safe space where they're not living in the middle of kind of the chaos that our options offer now. We sort of have that as a non-congregate shelter with our, hotel program that's coming to a close when COVID money ends. But we don't quite fully have that. And we do have a mental health residential program, but that's at University Oaks. It's really successful, except for when our people get caught up with their neighbors. That's like the biggest thing, the biggest issue they have with that program is people.
Is it around substance abuse or is it around mental health more?
Recurring, I think, both.
I'm asking because I wonder if it's a conversation to have with one of the recovery agencies like ARC, for example, that's trying to expand into housing, post-service housing.
Totally.
Might be a natural fit.
Yeah. I think that our people sometimes have a hard time getting into recovery programs like that because they require employment up front. They require payments and they're expensive. And so for some of our people, they can't, we might be able to foot the bill to pay an intake fee in first 2 weeks, but then they got to pay $235 a week after that. And sometimes our people all of that stress, all of that once with that. The only free program options we have is like our 45-day ITP treatment program or the Potter's House, which is it's a pretty high barrier for a treatment program.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was a cost attached.
Oh, all of those recovery halfway houses are like, go find a job, work, pay your rent at the end of the week, or you get put out. We'll talk after. They'll work with people if it's out of their control, but a lot of the time they all are paid for by clients. None of them are free and none of them are getting paid. Most of these people don't have the funds to pay for it.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
As you wish that you wish we would have discussed here, and there's going to be other opportunities, and y'all can always email at me. I just want to be conscious of your time.
I was hoping for a solution.
A solution just for
Yeah,
whole issue.
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I don't understand.
All right. I'm gonna move to the last slide just to wrap us up. So we are going to continue working on kind of prioritizing these actions based on your feedback today with the folks from ACC Gov. We're going to develop some case studies of selected strategies. More in-depth versions of what you saw today. So again, that's not saying it has to be implemented that way, but just to give you something to react to of this is how this is working. So you can even have the feedback of like, oh, I don't like that it says, HUD literal definition. I don't want to do that when we do this. And we will be doing a survey or some other forum to for people to provide additional feedback on how these are prioritized and some overall goals for the strategic plan that these will be organized into. The July, summer, and fall, you've seen those before. So if there was any other feedback that you weren't able to give about what else you would like to see, please share those with ACC Gov, and they can pass them on to us to make sure that all of that is considered as the plan is being put together. And we are at 5, and I thank you all.
Well done.
Can I say one more possible strategy that I'd like to see, like some thought around, at least that we're trying to figure out ourselves, is influx of people from communities. I get the immediate surrounding rural communities, but if other communities have policies that are preventing or addressing communities that are saying, oh, well, we have one shelter that's always full, but way more homeless folks in that, so we're gonna send them to Athens. Because that's something we see a lot of, is under-resourced communities, you know.
And hospitals sending people to drop them at our doorstep
Right.
from all over the states.
So basically how other service hubs deal with being a service hub.
Exactly.
Thereof, rather.
I get being a service hub for our immediate surrounding counties, but are there other examples or places where other like Gainesville, like Gwinnett, like Cobb, like those places all should have their own service hubs or be their own service hubs, and we should not be responsible for their folks. So
But we
that's,
get people from there.
I get folks from there all the time. I'm happy to help someone from Monroe, from Winder, from Madison County. Those places it makes sense, but Gainesville, Cobb, Gwinnett, those places don't.
Thanks, Rebecca.
It's the hospitals discharging patients and giving them an address in Athens is probably one of the most frustrating, recurring, consistent issues that we have too. It's just, and I don't know what to do.
That's something else we can dig into a little more for sure. All right, it's 5 o'clock, so I'm gonna wrap it up by thank you, Cloudburst.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you again.
Thank you.
I feel like a lot of work was going on the wall and I don't know what it is.
It's just like notes and comments.
Okay. Just a different form of recording it.
Yeah.
That's the ambition.